All right, welcome to day 4 of our countdown to 2026. Doing a little mini watercolor painting every day. Today we're gonna do some fun little snowmen. I did not paint them ahead of time. Today we're gonna paint in real time and see how it goes. And so for this, we need to kind of have a little bit of an idea where we want to put our snowman, because we're going to put a little background in it. And so we need to do just a small sketch. You can do one snowman in the middle. You can do a couple snowmen. You just want to sketch 3 circles. They don't need to be perfect. It's actually better, more realistic if they're not perfect. A little flat on the bottom. Obviously smaller and getting bigger as you go down to the bottom. You can also add another snowman, like it's maybe behind, maybe it's slightly smaller. They're kind of grouped together. Maybe they're walking. Kids used to have a book where the snowmen came to life at night. Maybe these snowmen are out and about having a good time. This one is smaller because it's further behind, and just to give it some depth, it looks smaller. It could also just be a smaller snowman. But we're gonna have a little horizon line in the distance, and that gives us room to paint in a very light background. In this case, because our snowmen are white, we want to avoid the snowmen. We can use bleed-proof white later to add in some white if we need to, but that wasn't part of my original plan. I would like to try to keep the white of the paper as much as possible. It's just a good thing to practice. So, yeah, let's jump on in. I'm just gonna do a really, really light blue background, like it's the middle of the day. And so we're going to use some of that phthalo blue green shade that I have. I'm getting a bunch of water in there. I did not spray my water or my paints before we started. Let me quickly do that just to activate any of the colors that we might use. Okay, so I've got a really, really light blue. I'm going to dab on my paper towel just to make sure it's not too wet. And then I'm gonna try it a little bit more. Just add some in there, and I'm gonna just spread it around, starting kind of near the top. We can actually have a little bit more dark near the top. And again, I forgot to tape down my paper. Maybe I'll actually plan ahead and tape it down tomorrow. We'll see. No promises. It does help a lot, though, if you tape down your paper, because you can already see this paper is curling, and it makes it a little bit harder, makes your water pool a bit more. And so taping it really does help. Just when I'm painting smaller like this, I tend to forget those details. When I'm doing my big projects, I always tape down my paper. So just something to be aware of. So yeah, we have a very light sky, barely there. You can make it darker if you wanted to do more of a nighttime scene, but I wanted to do kind of an afternoon type thing. And then what we can do while we're waiting for the background to dry before we work on our actual snowman is paint a little bit of the ground. Now the snowman, so the ground is going to be white, but we are going to paint the shadows of the snow. And so we need to pick one side of our painting where we want this sun, like the light, to be shining from, and the other side is going to be where our shadow is, and that's also going to be where we put our shadows on our snowman. So like if the light is coming from over here, we're going to have shadows on this side of the snowman, and so then we would also have shadows on the ground on that side of the snowman. And so that is what we are going to paint. For snow, I like to do like purple and blues for my shadows, not black. I just think it looks really nice. add some color to your painting. So I mixed a little bit of this rose of ultramarine with some indigo to get a more dark bluish purple, almost sort of gray. And then I'm adding some more water, got more purple. Okay, we want it to be really, really light. And I'm just gonna go kind of underneath this snowman, wetting my brush, drying it a bit, and I'm gonna pull that color out away from the snowman. Now I'm not adding more color, I'm just pulling a lot of that color away from the snowman, and it's darker right by the edge of the snowman there. I'm gonna do the same thing for this snowman over here, right by the edge, and then wet my brush and pull that color away. Okay. Now the other thing you can do is if you want to add any other shadows in the snow, any divots or bumps, unless it's perfectly undisturbed, which if somebody had built these snowmen wouldn't be accurate, but if they're magical snowmen who just formed themselves, then maybe they did. But you would want to just do little like splotches of color in the vicinity of your snowman, even all around. As if you're doing these kind of things, you kind of want them to be a little bit smaller the further back you go. And they just make the snow look a little more realistic and not flat. Just little hints. You can spread some of that color out. Add a little more over here. Not too much, but I didn't do a specific pattern as if somebody like walked. You could do that where you alternate and it looks like feet walking. I'm just putting a little bit in there to give a hint that the snow has been disturbed. All right, now we're gonna let this dry a little bit. I am gonna, because I didn't do it before, and really we should have done that before we did any paint, I'm gonna try to lift up some of my pencil lines, especially on the side where it's gonna be whiter. Anywhere that we painted over, the pencil is gonna stay, and that's okay. I don't mind mine being a little bit longer, or not longer, but darker, so you guys can see kind of what I'm doing. I still kept them light so that my pencil lines don't show through. Ideally, you would do that before you add the paint. All right, so we're gonna pause for a minute, just give that a little bit more time, make sure it is dry. We don't want our shadows of our snowman bleeding into our sky or bleeding into our ground, little shadows that we just did. And so we're just gonna give that a few minutes, come back when your painting is dry. It really shouldn't take very long. We didn't use that much water. If you used more water, accidentally got a little too wet, then you might want to let it dry a bit more. Just pause your video for a minute and come back when you are ready to move on to the next step. Okay, we are back. Mine is dry, ready to go. We're just going to work on those shadows on the side and just, yeah. The snowmen are white, and so we're not painting the actual snowman. We are painting the shadows of the snowman to give the idea of the form. So I'm going to use some more of that purplish blue that I mixed up earlier. And I'm just going, like I said, because of the sun, we're going to have the sun on our left, the left side of my paper. And so we're going to have shadows mainly on the right. And I'm going along just the opposite edges of the circle. We're going to go into where the separate layers of the snow, the body, are. I'm going to kind of dry my brush and pull some of that color into the center. I want it to be kind of darker on the edges and then come into the middle of it to make it look three-dimensional. I'm gonna grab some more of that color for the sides and again for this separate body section. And it's always a bit thicker there where the two sections meet. I do want to pull in, we don't want a hard line there. So I kind of wet my brush and then I dry it. I don't want it to be dripping wet. If we make it dripping wet, it's gonna add a bleed. And we don't typically want that. That is sometimes an effect that we might want to create on purpose, but typically we want to try to avoid that. And I'm just blending this color in from the sides there. Okay, actually used up a good bit of my paint color, so I'm gonna quickly mix a little bit more here. I probably should clean my palette. I don't clean my palette often. There are some people who like to clean it after every use. I think this is all perfectly good paint to still use, and so I don't want to get rid of any of it, so I leave it there unless I'm running out of space and I really need to clear a space. Most of the time I just grab another palette. And then I have tons of palettes covered in color, and it can be a problem. So it's up to you. Some people, like I said, they clean their palette after every painting. That's a personal preference. I don't. Okay, we're gonna go ahead and do the other shadow on this guy real quick. And I'm using a pretty large brush. You can see you can definitely go smaller if you want to get more detailed than I think even maybe with this smaller snowman. It might help to have a slightly smaller brush here. Sorry, I'm trying to make sure you can see all the steps that I'm doing. I'm trying to just pull that color. This is just a wet brush, just damp really. I'm just trying to pull the color that I laid down. I'll grab a little more color to go along here. All right, and after we get our bodies all created, we will then have to decorate our pumpkins. Ugh, got a fall on the brain still. Our snowmen. And that will be up to you how you decorate them, what you want them to wear. I will say we're gonna darken these shadows a bit because in a bit we're gonna let them dry, but I'm gonna do some very small light shadows on this side because we do want to kind of define where the curves are here, but we don't want near as much color. But it is still a form sticking out, and so it would have a little bit of shadow there, unless it's a very, very bright light. But I'm just doing very light, following the side, the little outlines that I have there. Barely touching. My brush is very damp, but not dripping wet. And I'm just adding a little bit of that color there. But even without adding another layer, you can see that it's still darker on this side. If that's not the case with yours, it's okay. We can do another layer on there, but we want to try to make sure this is really, really light. If you accidentally went a little bit dark, you can wet your brush, dry it off a little bit. You want it to be damp, but not wet. And then you can kind of lift some of that color. But it's going to still leave some behind. And we've got to be very careful. It's a practice type of thing. If you're struggling, maybe do this a couple of times. Finding the right consistency on your brush so that when you're lifting and not causing a bleed accidentally. Okay. Sorry, I'm just looking at my thing and trying to make sure I know what our next steps are. And I'm just taking a quick look. Yeah, we have been using very little water, so we should be able to move back on into darkening some of those shadows just a touch. I don't want to darken too much. I want to keep it light and soft. I really like that. I like that in general about watercolor, but it is good to get your values right. Don't be afraid to go a little darker sometimes. Like we did with our pine tree, we had some much darker areas, and the snowman is just very, very, very light. And that is okay. But some darker areas along the side really help to tell our brain a bit more about what's going on. Okay, rinsing my brush, drying my brush, and then I'm gonna pull some of that color into the middle to give more of that 3D effect. Okay. All right. And we're gonna do the same with our other little guy there. Give me just a second. I'm lifting a bit of that. And we're gonna cover some of this if we put on a scarf or a hat. And sometimes it's good to kind of plan ahead how you want to decorate your snowman. Just because like with the scarf, it might cover some of these shadowy areas, and so maybe we didn't need to do quite as much, and or depending on the color of your scarf, you might need to leave that area blank. Leave some white space if it's a light color you wanted to use. In this case, I hadn't really planned ahead yet what I wanted to do with mine. I've done them before where I add fun little things and make them like characters. I've done a Harry Potter snowman where I put like some glasses on him. We did the trunk, tree branch arms, and then I had him holding like a broom. And then wearing a, Gryffindor scarf. So that's something fun you can do, or, you know, anything you want, decorate them however you want. But we're just going to make sure that they are nice and dry before we move on to adding the decorations. I'm going to really quick, while I'm waiting on that to dry, darken a tiny bit of these shadows underneath the snowman. I really like that line there, but I want to kind of spread the shadow out just a touch more in some areas. Don't want to get too dark, but and really this bottom here near there should be similar consistency or texture. Sorry, no. Oh my gosh, just all the words in my head. Similar tone to what's on the ground there. Okay, perfect. They are looking good. Make this get a little smaller as it gets further away. Same with this one. There's a little tiny hair on my painting. Okay. So we'll give that a minute, and then we got to decide how we want to decorate them. We're going to put eyes on we're going to give them some eyes. We can give them some mouths. We can do the carrot nose. If you want, we can add scarves. We can add the tree branches for arms, buttons, hats. It's up to you. I think for now, I'm just going to keep mine fairly simple. We'll add the tree branch arms and some eyes and a scarf. But I don't know if I'm going to go too over the top right now. Maybe I'll paint another one and I can show you a little bit of how I did some other snowman type designs. But let's let our shadows dry before we move on. Go ahead and pause your video, and then when your painting feels dry and you're ready to move on, come on back and we'll keep going. All right, mine is pretty dry, so we're gonna go ahead and move on to the next steps. And full disclosure, I don't have a reference. Typically reference photos of like real snowmen look less, I don't know, cute. They're more wonky because it's hard to get your snowmen to look quite right. And so when we paint them, we want them to look a little more I don't know, cutesy or whatever. So I'm kind of winging it, but that doesn't always work well for me. So just keep that in mind. Let's add, well, the basics. Let's get some eyes on here. I'm going to use this Sepia that I have. I'm using a fine liner because I want to get really, really detailed, really small point when I'm painting. I'm going to use some Indigo to make it a closer, like blackish almost color. Really, if we wanted to make it really black, we'd mix like all three primaries, but this works. Okay. So we're going to kind of just figure out where we want to put our eyes in this little snowman and just paint some little circles. We can probably add some shadows around these eyes when we're done, if we really wanted to, but I also don't think it would necessarily be necessary. I would say I would go ahead and move to the mouth, but depending on where we put our carrot, if our carrot's going to cover the mouth at all, we don't want to do the mouth entirely. And so it might be better to wait until we've done the nose before we add in our mouth. If you want to have buttons on your snowman, you can add those. Unless you're going to do like a fun color. I'm just going to do some plain little black buttons. They're not perfect circles, and that's okay. Just little round bits. I left some room to put a scarf around his neck. And the other thing we can do is make some branches. I'm going to make it more brown and add a little bit of that burnt sienna to warm it up a bit. I'm just going to pick a spot here and just go for it, doing a little wiggly line. Add a branch or two. It's not going to be perfect, and actually it's better if you make them not symmetrical. Realistically, they won't be. They won't all have 2 fingers or however many fingers. And so there we go. And then remember on this snowman in the back, because it's further away and smaller, you want your branches to look a little smaller. Oops. That one I pushed a little too hard, so you want to barely touch. I pushed a little too hard, and so that got to be a much thicker branch, and that's okay. They're starting to come together now that we're adding some details. Real quick, let's go ahead and do the carrot nose so that we can see what we have room for, what we need to add. I'm mixing an orange because I don't really have orange. I'm using my cadmium red medium, Daniel Smith, and this is actually my Mission Gold Raw Umber, which I really, really like. I use that a lot. I also like Quin Gold, Daniel Smith Quinacridone Gold. It's another yellow that I go for a lot. I don't use the true yellows as often unless I'm mixing it with green, as you can see here. But you can use whatever color you want. If you have a straight orange, you can go ahead and use that as well. It just depends on how orange you want it to be. I like mine to be kind of a little more, muted, or kind of a neutral orange. All right, and they kind of look like they're heading in this direction towards the left, and so I'm going to actually have his nose kind of go that way. And I want it to, and you want it to stick kind of sideways, but it's more like it's sticking out, but you can only see part of it. And so it's kind of foreshortened. And so you're going to kind of go at an angle a little bit, but you don't want it to go like too far at an angle. And I'm gonna round it just a bit. And that's why I didn't do the mouth though, because it kind of goes down a bit too and it's covering a bit of where his mouth might be. And so it doesn't matter the shape. Remember, carrots come in all different shapes and sizes. We want this one to be a bit smaller because it's further back. Just give a hint of that color. Okay. I probably could have had his nose facing a slightly different way so they don't look like copies of each other, but that's okay. Now, before I do the rest of the mouth, because it might touch where the carrot is, I'm going to wait. I'm going to let that dry a little bit before I do that. If you want to add a hat to your snowman or a scarf, this is a good time to do that. I might go ahead and add like a little red and green striped scarf on one here to get it, let it be festive. I'm going to use my typical green that I go for, which is my Undersea green. And I'm just going to kind of create a little area here. I'm just kind of guessing and filling in. I'm leaving some space so that I can add in some red later. And I'm just kind of gonna give the impression there that it goes this way. And then I'm gonna have a little bit kind of coming down here. Now, I did not do anything to make it look like it folds over there at all. If we wanted to get really technical, we could, but I'm trying to keep this short and sweet, so I'm not going to go into detail about that. I think our eyes know that it's a scarf. It doesn't need to be perfect. And honestly, this scarf is a little tight. It looks like I could have made it a little looser on him, but that is okay. I'm also going to add a little hat. If you want to add like a top hat to your snowman. The hat will come down a little bit lower on his head. It actually will be a little curved, so I'm going to add a little bit of that, kind of filling it in. I'm just kind of sketching it in here. I actually think I made it too small. We're going to extend it a little bit. He needs it to fit nicely over his head. And then we're going to add the top of it. And again, this is another, you can kind of curve the top. But this is a more illustrative thing. It's obviously not very realistic. Oh, I got a hair. But we all get the idea. Now when it dries, it might dry lighter, and you can probably add some darker areas with another layer of black, make it like a shadow or something. You could maybe even drop it down a little bit lower. I'm actually going to leave my little guy in the back there as is. I actually don't even know that I need to add a mouth. I don't think I'm going to. If you wanted to, you could do like the little coal, kind of like the buttons and the eyes. Just add some smaller ones in the shape of a mouth, but I think they look good as they are. So I'm gonna call this good. If you followed along and painted your own snowman, I'd love to see how they turned out. If you want, you can add a small like shadow where the scarf sits. Just careful if it's still wet. Just a little bit under there, and especially on the backside behind where the snow would have been. And actually I just realized that I was going to make my scarf red and green, but you know what, the green and white look kind of works too. So, there we have it. Hope you enjoyed this one. If you have any questions or any other suggestions, please let me know. I would love to hear them. And I will see you tomorrow for day 5. Bye, y'all.